Hello, Funcast listeners. I'm Paul Stansik, and I'm a partner on the team here at Parker Gale. And inside the software businesses that we invest in, the biggest thing holding us back from faster growth typically isn't the competition, it's confusion. You see, too many companies out there build products that can deliver so much value, but then they have such a tough time talking about what they've built clearly so that customers can understand what they do, how they're different, and why they should buy ours instead of the other guys. My guest today is an expert in solving that problem. This week, we have April Dunford joining us. April is the author of two of my favorite books on sales and marketing, Obviously Awesome and Sales Pitch. And she just might be the best person in the world at turning complex technology products into clear market winning messages. In today's episode, April will unpack how to steer clear of the affliction of product pessimism and how technology companies can refine their sales pitch to win more customers, an essential part of the value creation plans that we build here inside the Parker Gale portfolio. So, whether you're an investor trying to get a little sharper on what good looks like within sales and marketing, or an executive trying to figure out how to make the most of your next opportunity to win over a new customer, I hope you'll enjoy today's conversation with me and April Dunford. 4, 3, 2, 1, Thunderbirds a go. Welcome to the PE Funcast. April Dunford is here with me, which I am really excited about. April's the author of Obviously Awesome and Sales Pitch. She's got those two titles strategically positioned right over her right shoulder, your left.
If you're looking at
And
this on the video, I have them up there so that I can make this joke. If you're
that's a
just
little
listening
nudge
on
to
if you're just listening, you don't have the video. Well, then I don't know. You'll have to find the video somewhere.
that's a little nudge to check us out on YouTube and not just on the audio formats. But today is going to be all about the stuff that April is the best in the world at. So product positioning, building a better sales and marketing message, and generally talking about the thing that you sell so it makes sense and so people actually buy it. And April's two books that she's written are, I think, the two best books on how to take that, make it make sense, and put it in the hands of your sales and marketing teams and use it to grow your business. So April and I were talking as we got set up here. And April, you said something pretty interesting. You said positioning is like a Q1 thing for a lot of
Yeah.
companies, this whole
Yeah.
new year, new me thing. So talk about that a little bit.
I didn't used to see this pattern, but we were talking because we were trying to schedule this thing all across Q1, and I kept canceling and delaying until now we're finally doing it in Q2, and mainly because my Q1 was really busy. And I've seen this a few years in a row now, and so now I think I see the pattern. But and I keep telling people it's a bit like a gym membership. People are like, "New year, new me."
Yep. Yep.
Like, we did that thing we did last year, but this year's going to be different. And so usually what I get is a lot of calls sort of November, December, and people are like, Q1's coming, like we'd like to do this thing in Q1. And then I get really, really, really busy in Q1. Not that Q2, Q3, Q4, like that, there's business there too, but it's not like the Q1 vibes, man.
So personal trainers and product positioning experts are
Yeah,
very
like
busy in Q1.
when you're really at the gym and it's super super busy in February and not so much in June, like it's the same kind of thing over here.
Amen. Well, yeah,
Which I
I
think
was
is a little bit like people should plan for this better because a lot of companies have sales kickoff meetings in January, February, but they don't get thinking about like, oh, hey, if we're going to roll out a new sales pitch, it'd be really great to have that sales pitch figured out in time for us to roll it out in January. And so if you really wanted to do that, you'd be looking at it in the fall, like in the early part of the fall,
Yep.
like maybe August, September, October, so that you'd have a chance to have the thing really perfected by then. But usually that's not it. Usually, I'm getting the call like second week of December and they're like, hey,
Are you
can we get
free
this
January
yeah, can we
2nd
get
for
this
a
done
workshop?
before
Yeah.
sales kickoff? And I'm like, yeah, maybe not. Maybe next year's sales kickoff. But yeah, so it's interesting to me. I don't think, the last few years it's been really busy in Q1. And this year I finally noticed it. I was like, every year I say, oh, I'm not going to overbook Q1. And then every year I do overbook Q1. But I think it's because, yeah. It's a good time to be thinking about positioning. Nobody wants to think their strategic thoughts in July and August. They want to think their strategic thoughts in December and January.
I agree. And people want what you're good at. Like I was thinking a little bit about what you write about and how you help companies and your superpower. And I think it's you create a very commercial kind of clarity for both sales teams and marketing teams and tech companies in general. And I think part of the reason that's so powerful, and tell me if you agree with this, for most tech companies, I think your biggest enemy is not the competition, it's confusion.
Hmm.
So, do you think that's right? And talk about how your work helps to solve that problem.
Yeah, I think there's a whole bunch of things wrapped up in this. Like one is, often I see companies really struggle with positioning, and the issue isn't so much the lack of clarity, I guess. It's more that different parts of the organization have a different opinion about what the
Ah,
positioning
okay.
should be.
Yep.
And so each part, like sales thinks they've got it, and marketing thinks they've got it, and the product team thinks they've got it. CEO founder is like, I got it. But they disagree.
Which is a problem.
So they all think they're perfectly clear on it. But then, marketing writes something and sales looks at it and says, what this? No, this isn't it, man. Or quite often I get the call from the CEO and the CEO says, you know what, April, you put me in front of a customer, I close that deal every time. But I have never figured out how to get sales to talk about it in the way that I talk about it. And so when I hear salespeople doing the pitch, that ain't it. When I look at what the marketing people have on the website, that ain't it. And can we just get everybody together in a room and get everybody all on the same page? That would actually be clarifying. So I think on the one hand, there's that, where internally we're not in alignment. And because we're not in alignment, bad things happen. The second thing is that I think as vendors, we grossly underestimate how difficult it is for a prospect to make sense of the market and the players in the market. So typically in a B2B purchase process, when a prospect comes in, they have actually never purchased something like yours before. Like even if
Totally.
we take something really basic, like let's say accounting software, like the VP finance goes to the accounting group and says, you, John, you go pick something for us, make a recommendation for new accounting software, recommend it to me, I'll write the check and we'll do it. And like John is sitting there going, oh man, like I've used accounting software, but I don't know who the vendors are in accounting software. I don't know what the state of the art of accounting software is. Like, I don't know what these features mean, half of them. I don't know what's good and bad. And we're a particular kind of company. And so we probably have special needs. And when they go out looking to do their research, there's more information than ever before. So much information. So there's comparison sites and there's analyst sites and there's G2 Crowd and then there's all the information that the vendors have on their respective sites, and then there's all kinds of blogs and everything else talking about this stuff. And so they are just overwhelmed with information.
Yep.
And they get all this information. A lot of it's contradictory. Like every single vendor says they're the number one. They can't all be number one.
Yep.
Or, I go to G2 Crowd and yeah, there's some vendors in the top right, but some of them are for big companies. Some of them are for little companies. There's dozens of them up there. How do I pick? And so I think when, as vendors, we need to be really cognizant of that. And we need to really understand, like, we have to make this very simple for a customer to understand why should we be on the short list? And then once we're on the short list, why pick us over the other guys? And this is actually way harder than we think as vendors. Like, I don't think we understand in our gut how hard it is for a prospect to actually make a deal happen in B2B.
Yeah, and it's confusing, right? I think the term buyer empathy gets thrown around a lot. And sometimes people use buyer empathy as kind of this undercover cop exercise where you want to know enough about the personas that you serve and the market that you sell to so that you can kind of fit in and play the part.
Yeah.
But I think what you're talking about is the more powerful form of buyer empathy, which is all about just like recognizing and sympathizing with this second job that you get handed when you get told to go out there and shop for technology, right? So, yeah, talk about like How does your work help to solve that problem? Because to me, one of the things that has been most helpful, especially from obviously Awesome, your first book, is when you do that positioning work well, you're kind of supplying the buyer with a framework that they can use to make that decision.
Yeah, a little bit. Like, I think if we do this really well, we do. Like, the big thing is we need to be able to very clearly and succinctly answer this question: why pick us over the other things you could pick?
Yep.
Like, just at that simple. And often inside the company, we don't think that's the question. We think the question is, why pick us? Period. But in B2B, you know, customers don't just pick the first thing they come across. They make a short list. And so customers need to understand, why should you be on the short list? But then they also need to understand, well, you know, why you versus everyone else.
Yeah.
And so
And
when we think about that, it's not just, we don't need to recognize just the value we can deliver to prospects, which a lot of companies start with that. They'll say, well, we need to deeply understand the customer's problem. And then we need to be able to articulate how we solve the customer's problem. And yes, this is absolutely true. But this is only step one. Because guess what? You solved the problem, and all your competitors solved a version of that problem as well. So now you got to go beyond that, and you got to say, well, you know, obviously we're going to solve your problem, but why pick us versus everyone else? Like, are we solving the problem in a different way? Do we solve the problem better? Do we solve the problem in a better way for a certain kind of customer? Like, it's this stuff that we need to get really, really super clear on. So we can't look at ourselves in a vacuum. We need to actually look at, well, what are the other choices that a
exactly.
customer could choose? Like, what are the alternatives? And some of those alternatives are things that look like us, but some of those alternatives are, well, maybe I just do it in a spreadsheet, or maybe I just do it with interns. But I need to understand that first, and then I need to understand, well, what makes me different? Like, what have we got that the alternatives don't have? And then because of that, what is the value we can deliver to a customer's business that the other alternatives can't? And then we got to figure out, well, you know, that's great. We can deliver this value, but not everybody cares about that value the same. So what are the characteristics of a target account that make them really, really care a lot about the value that only we can deliver? And so that's positioning, like defining that set of stuff and those set of things, and then having everybody in the company be clear on that across marketing, sales, product, you know, the founder, executives, being really clear on that. Like, here's who we compete with. Here's how we're different. This is the value we can deliver that no one else can. These are the kind of customers that are a really good fit for that value. Now I've answered the question, why pick me over the other guys? But we got to get all that stuff really clear, and we got to get everybody in agreement on that before we can do anything with it.
And the sequencing of that work really matters, right? Because
It
what
really
I've
does.
noticed when I've used your framework with our portfolio companies and with the companies that you've actually worked with, which has been a treat, by the way, big promoter of
Thank
working with
you.
April. There's the commercial. There's a really nice moment that you can create as a marketer or a salesperson by just giving people the list of options. Like, hey, you're going to read a lot of blogs, you're going to read a lot of stuff on G2, you're going to see a lot of reviews
Oh,
out there,
yeah.
you're going to see a lot of contradictory information. Really, your options for solving this problem come down to these three or four.
That's
And
right.
here's what they are, and here's the drawbacks, and here's why they might be a good fit for you or why you might be stuck using them today. That can be a really great level setting 5 minutes of a first sales conversation
Yeah.
or a webinar or a piece of marketing content. And I've noticed that a lot of tech companies out there skip that step because they can't wait to start talking about the cool thing that they've built and exactly how it works and why someone should be so excited to buy it.
But this is exactly it. Like, again, coming back to this idea of you're a B2B buyer, right? So you're the champion of this deal. Your boss has told you, go pick something. The first thing you have to do is figure out how to make sense of the market. Like, who fits
Yep.
where? And that is actually really, really difficult to do when you're starting at zero. Whereas we, as vendors, we eat, sleep, and breathe this stuff. We have an opinion. Like, if you asked us to draw a picture of the market, we happily draw one for you and
Yeah.
say, look, Those guys are the legacy vendors, and they sit over there. And these guys take these approaches. They're over there, and we're over here. And the pluses and minuses to each of those things look like this. Like, we should not be afraid to teach customers that.
100%.
Because that is exactly what they need to be able to make a good decision. Now, a lot of companies won't do it. They won't do it because they'll be like, look, we can't talk about the competitors. We'll get in trouble. We'll be like bashing the competitors, and people hate that. But most of the companies that I work with, we end up having something in the sales pitch where we can have a good conversation about different approaches to the problem. And half the time, we're not even saying the name of the competitor.
That's exactly right.
We're not talking about the company. We're talking about the approach. So we're saying, well, there's a whole bunch of companies out there, and they do it this way, and that's good for this and bad for this. And then there's these other folks, and they do it this way, good for this, bad for this. This kind of stuff is hugely valuable for prospects. If you look at the data on this, it's interesting. So there's been a bunch of research studies done on this. The last one I pulled up was from a few years ago, and they interviewed B2B software purchasers for enterprise software, and they asked them, like, what do you want in a sales pitch? Like, what do you actually wish the vendor was doing? And the top two answers were, one, I want perspectives on the market. Like, you're the experts on the market, not me. So I'm coming to you to figure out, what do you know that is going to help me make a decision?
Yeah, tell me what's going on.
How do I navigate alternatives? A typical B2B software first sales pitch doesn't touch either of those things.
Yeah, we go 0 for 2 way too often.
Here's me,
yeah.
Here's my thing, here's all my features. But we're so busy jumping into that we don't draw this picture or give the customer a rubric to understand the entire market and where we fit in it. And I think if we do a really good job of that and our competitors aren't doing it, the deal is ours.
Totally. It's a competitive advantage to even be willing to talk about that stuff,
right?
But it's also part of what makes positioning work hard is, one, that's an extra step. It's an unnatural step for a lot of companies. We're not used to educating people about the category that we're in because we're so used to talking about what it is that we sell. Can you talk about, like, what else makes positioning work hard? Like, what's most challenging when it comes to both nailing this and then getting it out into the market?
Well, so I think there's a couple of things. Like, I think it's fairly straightforward to get good positioning if we have two things that are true. So one is it's a cross-functional team effort, because if we don't have sales, marketing, product, and the founder in the room, then the positioning won't stick. Like, if we treat this as like a little thing that the marketing department does, positioning won't stick. The marketing department will do it, but sales will disagree, product will disagree, founder will probably disagree, and it'll just be this little thing that lives in marketing and it doesn't live anywhere else. And so that doesn't work very well. If we get this cross-functional team together, so we get everybody's agreement, like, we're all going to come together and we're going to work on it, we can't just put the team in a room and have it be like a free-for-all brainstorming thing where, somebody walks in and says, so why does everybody love our stuff so much? And then this is just going to be a battle of opinions. We need some kind of a process to work through that, as much as we can, takes the opinions out of it. My stuff attempts to do that by starting with this idea of a competitive landscape, because that's our stick in the ground of reality. Like, we know who we compete with. We know who shows up on a short list against us. We know what the status quo is in a deal. If we have salespeople, we can start there and then build from it. And then the last thing is, we really need to understand our differentiated value. Like, this is the key to everything. So what can we deliver for customers that no one else can? This is the nut of why pick us versus everyone else. Now, when we're thinking about how to turn that into a sales pitch, we've got to be thinking about, what does a customer need to understand in order to understand why that value is so important? So put another way, like, the founder typically woke up in the morning and said, you know what? All these other solutions out there suck for reasons A, B, C. And if we approach the problem in this way, we could unlock this different value. What is that? What is that story? Like, how do we actually educate the customer and fill them in on our insight, what we understand about the market that they don't understand. And if they did understand it, then they would go, ah, and they'd be right there with us and say, aha, oh yeah, I get it. So, we recognize this problem behind the problem, or this different perspective on the problem. And because of that, we built this thing in a totally different way. And then if I can do that and map all the other alternatives and talk about, well, here's pros and cons for other alternatives depending on what you want to get done. This is what a customer really needs in order to make a really good decision. But that is hard work.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite example or an illustrative example that you like to share with people? Because what you're really talking about is creating an unlock by pointing out the shortfalls of what people are trying today. So give us an example of one of those.
So I have a bunch that are like pet ones that I like because they're easy to understand and they're good ones to talk about. But let me give you Help Scout. So this is a company there in the customer service space. So think Zendesk and, typical help desk software. They're kind of in that space. Except they started out from the beginning, they were designed specifically to meet the needs of e-commerce businesses. Now, e-commerce businesses have slightly different way of looking at customer success than other folks because in e-commerce business, you don't have stores and you don't have salespeople. So when a customer calls customer service, that is one of the few precious times that you ever get to interact with a customer. So one of the things e-commerce businesses understand is that you want to make that interaction amazing, because if you do, then you'll get repeat business. People will buy more stuff off of you. It'll increase basket size. There's all this great stuff that unlocks. And if you give them a terrible experience, they go to your competitor and that's it, man. Terrible things happen. This is very, very different from the world that Zendesk grew up in, for example, where, think about customer service at a great big call center where all you're trying to do is get these people off the phone, man. So help desk software was designed, one, to do as little as possible with the customer, move them to low cost channels, and basically take the cost out of customer service to do as little as possible is really what you're trying to do. Whereas again, Help Scout recognize, well, this is very different over in e-commerce businesses. They actually want the customer to have this amazing experience. So if we look at Help Scout's positioning, we can start with their competitive alternatives. So it's two things. One, a lot of these e-commerce businesses, they start by just using a shared inbox. It's great because it's easy to use. But if they grow, then they want to be able to do customer service things like an assignments and prioritization and things like this. And so that's the competitor. Their big differentiator is, they can do all the things, all the bells and whistles that the help desk guys do, but they also have the interface looks like a shared inbox. So if you know how to use a shared inbox, it looks just like that. So it's great. Mm-hmm. And then they've got all these special features that enable you to deliver a really amazing customer experience. So, you don't get assigned a ticket number, you get to stay your name, for example. So the differentiated value that they can deliver is all around, way better, making it really easy for the customer success team, but delivering this really great customer service that increases revenue and increases repeat buying and all this stuff. So there's one or two ways, if you look at how a company would normally pitch that, the way software companies typically pitch a product like that is they would just talk about the features. So they just jump in and say, oh, hey, e-commerce business, you're here. Look, this is how you log in. And look, here's the interface. Looks like a shared inbox, right? And then look, but we do all these other things. Here's how you do assignments and prioritization and this and that. And I would keep going until I ran out of time. And then think about that. I'm the customer. Is that different than a shared inbox? I don't know, man. It kind of looks like a shared inbox. Is that different than Zendesk? I don't know, man. It's got a lot of the same features as Zendesk. So did it answer the question? Why pick me over the other guys? Not really.
Right? And that sounds like a closed lost to status quo.
Yeah, it's just I don't know. This kind of sounds like the thing. Or we could pitch it my way, which is we're going to start with the insight. Let's start with why we built what we built. So instead, help scout person gets on the phone with e-commerce business. Hey, e-commerce businesses, like customer success. Like we work with a lot of e-commerce businesses, thousands of them. And what we've noticed is in e-commerce, customer success is different. Like we really see this as a growth driver. And they've got a couple of slides that talk about, how great a good interaction, what the impact of that is on the business and what the impact is on the business of a bad interaction, and talking about, so they spend like a minute talking about that. And they're like, do you agree? And most of the e-commerce businesses are like, yeah, absolutely. Like we absolutely understand that customer success is really important. That's why we don't want to mess it up. Great. Then we move to the next step where we say, look, like we've worked with a lot of companies. This is what we see. Usually they start with a shared inbox. It's great because it's really easy to use, really simple. The downside is if you're growing, you need these other features, and that just doesn't have them. And then you're looking at help desk software. And the great thing about help desk software is it does all the things, like all the bells and whistles. The downside is, one, a little bit harder for your folks to use it. And two, it's kind of designed to, get people off the phone and drive the cost out of this and not deliver a great experience. So you get assigned a ticket number. You're going to get pushed to a low-cost channel, whether you want it or not. And so, and this would be a conversation with the customer. Have you looked at help desk software? Are you considering that now? What are you using today? What are your requirements? Blah, blah, blah. We're doing discovery. And then we end this first part of the pitch by going, so, before we get to the demo, like, can we agree in a perfect world, a great customer service solution for a company like yours would, one, be really easy to use, like as easy to use as a shared inbox. Two, give you all the bells and whistles so that you wouldn't have to migrate to some other platform later when you grow. And then lastly, it would be designed to deliver an amazing customer experience because that's important. So we want that, right? Now, if the customer says, right, then I got them. Like all I got to do is show that I do that.
Yeah. Build the assessment framework in front of their face.
So now I switch to the actual demo part, but the demo isn't just showing them all the features randomly. It's, okay, I got to show how we hit those three things. So first one's easy to use as a shared inbox. Look at it, man. Looks just like a shared inbox. Super easy, blah, blah, blah. Two, has all the bells and whistles, so you don't have to ever migrate off it. So here's how you do prioritizations and assignments and blah, blah, blah. And then the last one is delivers amazing experience. Like you're not ticket number 143 anymore. You're still Paul Stansik. And customers can choose what channel they want. If they want to do text message, let's let them do text message. If they want to do the FAQ, send them to the FAQ. But a customer gets to choose. And so at the end of that pitch, it's very clear how we're different than the other things that they could pick. So as you would imagine, that pitch is a lot more effective than just, here's all the features, you figure it out.
And there's a feeling that you leave the prospect with doing it that way, where whether they say this or not, especially if they're shopping around to other competitors, they say, they taught me something. They kind of guided me through this process and gave me a way to think about the market, which was both insightful and very helpful. And subconsciously, I kind of think that's going to translate to how they're going to take care of me if I do choose to become a customer.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And, the other thing you do is you're establishing this credibility, right? That says, look, we've worked with lots of companies just like you, and here's what we've seen. And it also admits that there might be situations where we're not the best fit. Like if you've got one customer service rep and your business isn't growing that much and everything's fine, maybe shared inbox okay for you. Like maybe come back and talk to us next year. Or if you don't care about the customer's experience and your main problem is that support is too expensive, then maybe Zendesk's your thing. Maybe you want to go traditional help desk route.
We would build that.
Admitting that we're not perfect for everything. We're perfect for certain kinds of companies in a certain way, because otherwise we just look stupid. I mean, Zendesk's a great, big, amazing company. like, we would look dumb if we just went in there and said, oh yeah, terrible
We're
software,
better than them
terrible.
in every way under
Yeah,
the
not
sun.
good for nothing, man.
Well, we would
So
build
instead, you're
that.
coming in and you're acting like a guide. That's the posture, right? You come in and you're like, I'm just trying to be helpful, man. And so, yeah, and here's what we see, and this is what, this is what we think is important. And you're gonna do your own math and your own calculus on what you need and what you don't need. But we're trying to give you a way to think about the whole market and show you where we fit in there.
Yeah, I love that. And what a powerful way to build trust. So, one of our companies that you worked with a few years ago, a company called SMA Technologies, that's in the automation space in the world of credit unions, we would build that into a page in their sales pitch deck where we said, okay, we get 100 inbound calls a year from people who are either desperately needing our help or just want to explore the category that we sit in. And
Yeah.
most of them are doing something today. They're either tackling this problem themselves and kind of moving data between systems. We call it the swivel chair problem because you're swiveling back and forth between systems. And here's the problem with that, or the challenge with that. You're using a simple scheduling tool, which is just at this time, this process is going to run every day.
Yeah.
But you can very quickly push that tool to its limits, either in terms of customization or in terms of overall workload, or you're just totally outsourcing this. And you're kind of wondering why you still haven't saved as much time as those outsourcing people have told you they would. And when we built that into the sales pitch deck, what we found was salespeople would often spend way more time on that page than they originally anticipated. One, because it's a great opportunity for discovery.
Yeah, it's
Hey,
a
which of
great
these
way to do discovery. And
Yeah.
I think often our sales pitches don't have a good place for us to do structured discovery. So I think this is a great spot to do it.
Yeah, you need to create the toeholds in the pitch deck to do discovery, where it's
That's
almost
right.
unnatural to ask them to point to the page and say which one of these things are you. But it ended up being a tremendous credibility builder for our sales team, so much so
Yeah.
that prospects would ask us to send that page to them after the initial guide because they wanted a
Because
way to
it's
talk about the
useful.
market. Exactly. So we're already getting into kind of the bridge from your first book to your second book, and I kind of view them as a yin and yang, right? Because they're
Yeah.
kind of talking about the same thing, just in a slightly different context. But you have this thing in sales pitch where you say what we touched on earlier, like the goal of a sales pitch, it's three things. Like if you leave someone with understanding about their choices, the trade-offs,
Yeah.
and when to pick your solution, like the
Yeah.
rules of when you make the most sense, then you've done your job. So how do you think about taking a team that's done that workshopy exercise and they feel like they've nailed at least V1 of their product positioning, and then putting that into the sales pitch so any quota carrying rep can go out there and be dangerous with that same story? Like, how do you do that?
Yeah. So my second book is an attempt to give you a structure where you can map the piece parts of your positioning into a good sales pitch that does exactly that. And so my structure has this kind of two piece parts to it. So there's the setup, the follow through. The setup is we start with our insight. What does a customer have to understand in order to understand our value? We move into this pros and cons of alternatives and let's map out the whole market. And then the last step in the setup is this: can we agree for a customer like you, this is probably what you need? And then once we have that set up, then we can switch gears and talk about features and capabilities of the product, but we do it within the context of the value that those features deliver. So we say, okay, we've established three things are really important. Let me show you how we do those three things, and that's it. The vast majority of the companies that I've worked with, it's interesting, like even in companies where they've taken their positioning quite seriously, they take it very seriously on the marketing side, but then you go into this first call and it all goes out the window and everybody's just saying, hey, look, man, we got 5 drop-down menus. I'm clicking on all 5.
Pop some wheelies. Yep.
And the problem is that the customer is sitting there going, well, I don't know, man. Like, does everybody have these same features, or are you the only guys with this feature? Why some of these features I've never seen before? So why are they important? What's the value of these features? And are they important to customers like me? Are you a good fit for customers like me? And again, why pick you over the other guys instead of just, hey, look at all my stuff? So when I started doing this positioning work, I thought we could just get the gang together and do positioning. And then, companies could figure out on their own how to build a sales pitch around that. But after I did that for a couple of years, it became quite clear to me that companies did not know how to do that. And in fact,
Correct.
if we walked out of there without doing the sales pitch, again, marketing would have their act together and they'd be talking about this differentiated value. But the minute that lead hit sales, they're getting like clickety click click on the drop down menus, and that's it. So I thought, well, if we really want this positioning to stick, we're going to have to take it and turn it into a sales pitch. The first hurdle was that nobody had a sales pitch structure that they liked. Like almost everybody, if they had a pitch at all, it was some pitch, some random collection of slides that has been around since the year of the flood. And like nobody knows where they came from, like I'll say, who built this? And they'll be like, oh gosh, I don't know, probably John. He hasn't worked here in 10 years, like some slide. And then it'll mainly be a product walkthrough. Sometimes they'd have a slide at the beginning that would say, this is the problem, like the problem is this.
Sometimes, yep.
Sometimes they'd have that one. And I was taught that when I started in product marketing. I was taught that. Like I was always selling database stuff. And the problem was always the same. Like it was like, the problem, man, is too much data. Too much data. It's like, we got a lot of data and the data's going like this. And like, you need to manage that. And the hilarious thing about starting the pitch that way is like, any of our competitors solved that problem. Like there was nothing unique in that. What I liked about starting with the insight is unique to you. Nobody else has that insight. If I go back to the Help Scout example, only Help Scout can say this. Nobody else says it. Zendesk doesn't say it. They don't look at the world that way. And so we start with something that is unique to us, and then we're basically building the case for our differentiated value.
Yeah, I've heard somewhere, he who frames the problem best wins.
But
right?
I mean, it's true in many ways. Like, I mean, if we think about it at the very core of it, in the early days, when a prospect is making a short list and doing first calls with vendors, what they're really trying to do is establish their purchase criteria. So they have probably done some little thing like this and said, well, look, it needs to adhere to this and it needs to integrate with our accounting system and it needs to make sure that it supports this thing. And we have this, this old system that didn't do X, Y, Z. So the new one needs to do that. But they don't know what they don't know. And so then they're coming in to have the conversation with you to validate, like, do we have the right purchase criteria? Are there things we haven't thought about here? And oh yeah, they care whether or not you meet the current purchase criteria, but we have an amazing opportunity to shift their thinking about purchase criteria.
Yes.
And so if we can do that effectively in a first call, then again, we've just advantaged ourselves because it's a little bit like writing the RFP. If we can come in and say, look, we've worked with 1,000 companies like you, and trust me, you need to worry about these 3 things, and can explain to a customer, teach them why that's important, well, you guaranteed every other vendor they go talk to, they're going to be asking about those 3 things.
Yeah, and that could be such an ownable, powerful piece of IP, right? And especially if you frame it as an outgrowth of your experience with people who look like them. Like, hey, we work with 500 people in your industry, in your segment, and the things they care most about are these. Right. And do with that what you will, but we wanted to make sure that you knew what those things were so that you can incorporate that into your process as appropriate, right? So I think that's super important. The other important part of what you just said is that implicit request to help them build the framework they use to evaluate what they might buy. It's often unspoken, right? And this is one of those things that I think marketing and sales teams need to give themselves permission to do, is be a little brave, be a little bold, and say, look, there's lots of frameworks out there for how you can evaluate a product like this, what your shopping list should be, what your purchase criteria should have on it. This is ours. And this is the experience that it comes from. And your mileage may vary, but here it is. And that is a brave move that can work very well if you're willing to take a shot at
Well,
it.
and I'll tell you, there's this terrible stat that gets thrown around about this that drives me absolutely nuts.
I can't wait.
And this is the stat. The stat says your buyer, by the time they get to your sales rep,
Yep.
is 80% of the way through the purchase process. And so some companies have taken this to mean the best we can do is take orders, man. They've already made up their mind. They've already done stuff. Either our marketing worked or it didn't. So what's sales got left to do here even?
Yeah, I think if you handed the data from that study to a statistician, this is a guess because I haven't seen the data, I bet the real summary is something like they've already consumed 80% of the content that they will consume in the purchase process. Not that their work is 80% done. They've got a bunch of touches, but they don't have the synthesis or the clarity on what they're actually looking for yet.
And a lot of times companies they come to the sales rep having done an inordinate amount of research, like an absolutely nut job pile of research. Does that mean they understand any of it?
No.
If they fully understood it, then we don't need salespeople, right?
100%.
We can sell this zero touch off the website. Why are they, again, what do they want when they're talking to a salesperson? We know because we asked them. And the answer was, I want perspectives on the market and I want your help navigating alternatives. So why don't we just give them what they want, man? But this thing about the customer is 80% of the way through and we could just throw up our hands and, and take the order or not.
I don't buy it either.
Nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. Here's the other thing is that we also know from the data. Data tells us that in B2B, 40 to 60%, half on average, of B2B purchase processes end in no decision.
Yep.
Yeah, so maybe I'm 80% of the way to not making a decision at all, man.
Yeah, and there's a lot of tire kickers out there, and it's good to have qualification criteria to get a sense of how real it is. But I think a lot of those no decisions, if you track that as a data point.
Customers are drowning in information.
Yes.
But they are absolutely starved for insight.
Amen.
I can look at 50 websites and they'll all say we're the number one, whatever. And then I can go to G2 Crowd and read all the reviews and say, oh, these guys are 4.7 and these guys are 4.72. Does that mean they're better? I can spend a crazy amount of time looking at all this stuff and be no closer to making a decision than I was 3 months ago.
100%. Can we talk about product pessimism?
Yes.
So I loved your blog post on this topic. Anybody who's listening to this should go and read it. Talk about what you mean when you say product pessimism and what companies should be on the lookout for.
Yeah. So, so one of the neat things about being the positioning lady is that you get to talk to a lot of companies about their positioning. And so you start seeing patterns that, I didn't see when I was in-house because, you do a positioning exercise once a year or something, as opposed to, what I'm doing now. It's like 30 or 40 of these in a year. And so, and in total, maybe I've worked with, I don't know, it's going on about 300 companies now. So you start seeing these patterns. And there's one very frustrating one that I have come across a number of times. And it's I would call it this overly pessimistic product thinking.
Yep.
And what you get sometimes, and I hate to say it, but a lot of times it comes out of the product management organization. And what you'll get is this smart, keen head of product.
Yep.
Who thinks their job is to identify problems. And so they'll go out and look at the market and they'll look at the other products out there and they'll have this list of things that we suck at and say, oh my God, we suck at all these things. And then they'll go to the team and be like, man, those guys beat us on this thing and those guys beat us on this thing and those guys are better than us.
There's
on
no
this
hope.
Thing. And we have all these things and so we need to catch up, man. We need to catch up in all these ways. And so let's build a roadmap of all these ways that we're going to catch up. And they get really intensely focused on the feature function capabilities of the competitors, but in particular, the places where we don't stack up. And then what happens is I come in and we're talking about differentiated value. And so I come in and say, okay, who are the competitors? We'll list out the competitors. And then I'll say, what do we do that they don't do? And this pessimistic product person will be sitting there with their arms crossed and say, they're better than us at everything. They're better than everything. They just do everything. They say, I don't know what we do better, but let me tell you what we do worse. And they give me a big list. You know? And I'm like, I don't care what we do worse, because what we do worse doesn't win any deals. You know what wins deals? What we do better. And sometimes what you'll get is the sales team will be there, and they'll say, well, we win a lot of deals because we do this thing way better than anyone else. And the pessimistic product person will say, no, we don't. Gaslight them completely. And the salesperson will say, well, we do. I know we do. And they'll start listing deals that we close because we do this thing better. And often you'll get this pessimistic person will come and say, well, that's just because the customer is stupid. If the customer had done their research better, they would know that technically
they would never
we're not
choose
better.
us. Yep.
And so the worst part about this attitude is it is contagious, because whenever marketing comes to the product team or sales comes to the product team and says, what about this? All they can talk about is all the stuff like, according to this person, we shouldn't do any deals. No deals should happen at all.
I see this a lot.
And now the flip side of this is it is demonstrably not true. Like, we know it's not true because this is often in companies that are doing 30, 40, 50 million revenue with decent growth on that. So every day, customers are doing their homework and they're picking us. Every day, customers are looking at the short list and they're picking us for reasons. And trust me, customers are not idiots.
So
they're picking us for reasons. And despite this, there's this feeling like, oh gosh, we have to catch up. And so instead of the product team being experts on where we win and how we're beating customers, they instead become expert just downers, like, and often the companies that they're trying to catch up with are not even companies we compete with. They're companies that theoretically we could compete with them, but they never show up on a customer short list. So they'll say, the sales rep will come in and say, we win because we have this amazing capability around this thing. And I'll say, well, it sounds like you have differentiated value there. You can deliver that value better than anyone else. And the pessimistic person says, no, not true.
Time
not
out.
true. There's two guys in a basement in Silicon Valley, and they just got funded for a thing, and their website says they do that. It's like, you know what? This doesn't count. This doesn't count. A customer doesn't know them. There's 1,000 reasons the customer is not going to pick two guys in the valley. They haven't even closed a deal yet. Like, their website says that. What does that mean? Like, people lie.
Yeah.
So they're just, so this drives me crazy. And I think when this takes hold of a team, it has the potential to wipe the entire company out. Just wipe it out. Because after a while, sales will start to believe it. And they'll start to believe, like, oh, we lost this deal. And you'll be like, why did we lose that deal? Oh, because our product sucks, man. Because it doesn't, there's all these things that it doesn't do. And marketing's coming to product and saying, we're trying to do campaigns, we're trying to do stuff. Product's like, good luck. Good luck with that piece of junk product. No.
So
and then everybody gets all down on it, and then the CEO's like, I don't get it. Like, revenue's going like this. Why is everyone around here so bummed out?
So let me ask you this. Product pessimism, I think we can both agree, is poison.
It's really bad.
What's the antidote?
Well, so there's a handful of things. Like, often I find that in these organizations where the product team's really pessimistic, one is they don't seem to have any experience with good customers. They get called in on the hard cases. So there's a deal where we probably shouldn't even be chasing it. it's not a good fit for our stuff. We're slogging through this deal and we're like, hey, let's call the product team in to try and help us. And they only ever see those deals. And for every one of those deals, there's 1,000 deals that close in 2 calls and we didn't need to call the product team in, and they don't talk to those people. And so they have this negative perspective because they only get called in on these bad fit deals. So one of the ways we can fight against this pessimism is to make sure that the product team is involved in deals that are good. And they're not just involved in the things where it's a hard case. The second thing is that, when we're doing analysis on deals, again, the pessimistic product organization is really, really focused on losses. And so they'll be combing through these lost deals and they'll be calling the lost deals and trying to do that analysis. Like, one of the ways to get over this is to have that team do win analysis.
Love that.
Call everybody that's winning and ask them and talk to them. Because often, again, this pessimistic product people, they're only talking to the people that suck. They're only talking to the ones that, like, people that didn't buy your stuff because they were bad fit, deals that were really hard, terrible thing. And so somehow you're going to have to get this team exposed to the love over there.
I love that.
And then the last thing is that, this is a harder, more systematic thing. Like, I would question the product strategy or the product roadmap if all you're ever trying to do is catch up to folks that have a lead on you on something. Like, what are you doing to maintain your lead in things? Like, what is this strategy? Like, where do we win in 2 years? Where do we win in 5 years? And I think CEOs and other people in the organization need to make sure that they're clearly articulating this vision and that product is building towards that vision and building a product that can win in the market, as opposed to a product that sucks a little bit less than the way we think it sucks today, which is not a recipe for ever building great product anywhere. And so that's what I would do if I see this. But left unchecked, I think it's super dangerous.
I agree. And there's a quote that I love to use when I'm teaching our companies about ideal customer profile, and it's from the great management thinker Dolly Parton. And she said at one point, you should figure out who you are and then do it on purpose.
Yeah.
And I think that is such good advice, whether you're building a target account list or whether you're trying to figure out, to your point, where do you already have a head start? And how can you go open up a bigger lead? And the simple guidance of telling your product people, especially, to get exposed to the love. Because I think you're right. Too often they get called in on the stuff, that the big enterprise deal that you stretched for, or the new feature that's not quite ready yet, or the customer that's just pissed off at you. And it's a little bit of a problematic kind of exposure therapy, right?
That's right. That's right. All they ever see are the hard cases, and they're just like, nope, this is bad. This is all bad. Yeah. So we need to get them exposed to the good stuff too.
Yeah, I love that. Well, we're coming up on time. I did want to ask you about your writing process as a last thing. What did you learn from writing your second book? Did you do anything different? Did you change anything about the process?
Oh man, the second book was so much easier than the first book.
I thought you were going to say that.
The first book, I was an idiot because I didn't know anything. and every stupid thing I could have done, I did. And so the second time around was a joy. The first time was that, a big ball of stress, but the second time was actually great. Now, part of that was the people I used to help me. Like, I think you have a choice now. You can publish with a traditional publisher, or you can do it yourself. I think most people that have actually tried self-publishing would come to you and say they're not really sure what a publisher does for you in this day and age.
Yep.
But if you're going to self-publish, I highly recommend that you work with somebody that knows what they're doing. And so I worked with a company called Page 2 Publishing, like shout out for Page 2. But what they do is work with self-published authors, but their team are like ex-publishing people. So you get the same editors you would get at HarperCollins, and the same cover designer as, the guy who does covers for HarperCollins, and all that stuff. And then a project manager to help you project manage through the whole thing. And they just do all the annoying things that you would have a publisher do for you.
Where are my pages? Yep.
Except you just pay them a bit of money up front, and then you keep all your royalties. So I did that, and I had worked with them on the first book. But the first book was harder because it was my first book and I didn't know what I was doing. And, and we ended up making a lot of changes and a lot of stuff. The second book, I went back to them for the second book, and it was just, I mean, I couldn't imagine that process going more smooth than it went. I think the writing of the book is not hard. I think editing is very hard.
Yeah, I
And I
agree.
think you should spend some time getting some good editors, because they can take a thing that isn't very good and turn it into something that really sings. And so, I had a really good time working with those folks. I'd recommend them, but I think there's other folks out there that do it too. I think if you want to, self-publishing doesn't mean go it on your own. I think there's still a lot of value in working with people that are experts and know this stuff, especially if you're doing your first one.
Well, it came together beautifully. And one of the things I love about both of your books is, one, they sound like you. Like I can
Oh,
hear
good.
your voice when I read both of them. Two, you can finish them on a decent length plane flight. I think the first time that I read
Yeah.
Obviously Awesome, I was flying from Chicago to LA, and I remember landing and texting someone on my team and saying, like, we got to buy this thing for everybody in the portfolio because it just makes so much sense, and I see the problem everywhere. So for anybody listening today, if you haven't read Obviously Awesome or Sales Pitch, and you sell a product that needs some explaining, like, just press pause right now, go buy them, go read them, go consume everything April's ever put out there, because you will have a better business as a result of it. And this was a really fun opportunity to talk about how you think and how you help, and the ways you've pitched in, both in the broader kind of tech community and in our portfolio as well. So thanks for coming on.
That's awesome. Well, thanks so much, and thanks for having me.
And if people want to learn more about you, obviously buy the book again, but where should they check your stuff out?
Yeah, books are a really good place to start. Like, especially, I'd start with Obviously Awesome and then go to Sales Pitch second. AprilDunford.com is my website. So if you want to find out more what I do as a consultant, or if you want to sign up for the newsletter, or I have this podcast that I'm doing for the positioning nerds out
Yeah.
there. If you want to go deep on that, you can go there. But yeah, AprilDunford.com is probably the best thing. And then if you just want to, like, follow me on social media or something, LinkedIn's probably the only one where I'm actually active these days.
Nice. Well, April, thanks again. This was really fun.
All right. Well, thanks for having me.